Welcome back, friends. In our previous episode, we looked to the Lord's Prayer and how Jesus used that to instruct his followers as to how to pray. Today, we're going to be back and looking to Jesus' life again for instruction on how we can approach our life with God. So, have you ever wondered if you can really be honest with God when you pray? When I was 14, I had to go in for surgery to correct a curvature in the spine, scoliosis. And it was a massive procedure, 8 to 9 hours, that involved correcting the curvature, attaching metal rods to the length of my spine, and then closing me back up. And I was terrified. The night before surgery, I went up to my youth pastor and unpacked my heart, told him how terrified I was, and I still remember to this day what he said. He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders, and said, "You'll be fine," and walked away. And I thought in that moment, that was the wrong response. And I was fine, but that's not always the case when you have surgery. Have you ever had someone expect you to have a superhuman response to a situation that's terrible or scary? Well, Jesus also had his share of terrifying and terrible moments. And we catch a glimpse of that in this passage right before he was captured and crucified. So let's look to Matthew 26, starting in verse 36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." This is pretty vulnerable, right? And Jesus even blatantly expresses what he's feeling in verse 38. I love how the Message translation captures this moment. It says, "The sorrow is crushing my life out. Stay here and keep vigil with me." These are stark words, and maybe it's surprising to hear his distress. Jesus knew what was to come. He had predicted his death, and he knew that an awful death was just hours away. He also knew resurrection was coming too. He knew the end of the story. And yet, what was his response knowing all that was to come in the next few days? Did he rejoice? Say, "We got this, God"? No. He's sorrowful. He even asks God to intervene. Even with knowing the good that is to come, Jesus can't help but feel his feelings. We see such a tender picture of his humanity, and his response is relatable. The New Testament is peppered with stories of Jesus praying, but in this moment of the Garden of Gethsemane, we get this really intimate glimpse into his prayer life. You may notice that this prayer in Gethsemane looks very differently from our preconceived notions about how Jesus prayed. So what does this mean for us? Well, here's the good news, and the word gospel literally means good news. As we catch this glimpse of who Jesus was in his prayer life and his relationship with God, we get a picture of how prayer can be. Prayer can be intimate. Prayer can be raw. Prayer can be vulnerable. So often we think we have to hide who we are when we come to prayer, but in reality, we're welcome to show up completely as we are when we approach God in prayer. As we catch this glimpse of how Jesus prayed and his relationship with God, we see how prayer can really be. Prayer can be intimate. It can be raw. It can be vulnerable. So often we approach prayer as if we have to fix ourselves, but actually we're welcome to come just as we are. We don't have to show up trying to impress our daddy, trying to show off, trying to make him love us. We can show up with dirty, skinned knees and tear-stained faces as ourselves. To close this time, I'm inviting you to pray like Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane, to come with your fears, your anxieties, your unanswered questions, your needs. To let God into these areas of your life that are painful and don't have easy answers. After this video ends, I'm going to invite you to take some time to pray and to share with God what you're feeling right now. Tell him how you feel in this moment, not how you should feel or how you'd like to feel, but how you actually feel right here, right now. You can pray out loud, you can pray quietly, or you can write down your prayers. But if you're worried about being honest in prayer, sometimes it's helpful to start by writing your prayers out and then reading them out loud. Once you've done this, pause and listen for God. You may hear from Him and you may not, but what doesn't change is the truth that Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, He is here with you. Remember, God is not surprised by your honesty. He welcomes you to show up as yourself. Because you are His creation. You are His masterpiece. The invitation is to be with God as yourself. And He's eager to meet with you. So I'm going to give you some time to meet with God and see what happens.